All right, hello everyone. My name is Ryan. If someone other than my teacher is watching this video, hello. I doubt that. Unless someone else is just a big Jane Austen fan and somehow found this video. But yeah, welcome. Today I'm going to be making a tier list of all the male characters in the Jane Austen canon and how I would rank them as far as their marriageability goes. I'll be ranking them based on a couple different parameters. It is going to somewhat be similar to a list of me just talking about my favorite characters and which characters I like the best. But I am going to be taking into account other factors when determining where they go on this list. So some of the rules I'm going to be talking about their monetary backing, the money they're going to inherit or they already have, because that is important. Even if we're talking from a modern perspective, that is something that influences people's thoughts. But yeah, I'm going to be talking about it from a combination of modern and 1800s standards. And just it's mostly going to be personal. This is not going to be objective in any way. I do have some good points, I would say, that justify where I would rank them. But I totally understand if you disagree and you have other character that you like better than I do. So some other things it's going to be kind of based on is something called relationship trust, which I would define as having a relationship where they are honest with each other, communicate. You'll see that it's very very few characters on this list are actually very communicative. Maybe for the standards of the 1800s, a lot of them are more communicative, but when looking at it from modern times, a lot of these guys are just really nonsensical and don't really give much regard for the women that they're trying to get with. So that's a shame, but there are a couple winners here, I would say. So that's another thing I'm going to be basing on is the treatment of women. How they respect the women they're going after or respect their decisions. Another thing that is unfortunately not very common in all of these characters. We have some exceptions though that I'm going to be excited to talk about. Also I'm going to base it on their family because that is something that matters. If you're going to get married to someone, you're making them a part of your family. That's important for 1800s and modern day. You have to take into account how you get along with other members of the groups of the person's family. So that's basically the parameters of what I'm going to be judging this based on. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to be going just from left to right with all of these names. It's not really a particular order. It's just kind of how I formatted my notes. So we're going to start with one of the most famous, probably the most famous male in Austen's canon, MR.DARCY. So I actually knew a bit about MR.DARCY before reading Pride and Prejudice and before participating in this class. Because he was a part of the Austen fame, I guess. Probably one of her more recognizable characters. So I knew people who had talked about him, and a lot of people who thought him a very appealing, very a dreamy character, you know. So in my personal opinion, I see the appeal because you know what, he does change. I will acknowledge that, but he's still just kind of a dick if you ask me. I mean, I'll get into some of my notes here. All right. So he's the primary love interest of Elizabeth, the main character of Pride and Prejudice. So at the beginning of the book, he's kind of described as ignorant of female, of women, really. Ignorant of what they want. And he's really just grumpy, I would say, at the beginning of the book. And it kind of leads to him and Elizabeth's relationship being... They would kind of tease each other. Sometimes it would get more excessive than teasing. I think. I do think they actually had fights. It wasn't all just this sexual game they were playing. Yeah, when we're talking about money, though, he is really rich, which is a good thing. He's also considered very handsome. Now, I'm not really basing this on the movies at all because I haven't seen any of them, but and I don't really. It's there's not much you can really say about attractiveness, but he's considered attractive in the book, so I would say that gives him points. They definitely point that out specifically. But yeah, really, where he loses points, in my opinion, is how he treats Elizabeth. And he definitely loses points for his first proposal to Elizabeth. Some say that this comes kind of out of character, because in the first half of the book, Mr. Darcy doesn't want to get married to anybody really, and he definitely doesn't want to get married to Elizabeth. So then when he asks her, it's a little weird. But really, I find it in character, at least for the first half, since he is kind of inconsiderate, and he's kind of following suit of Mr. Collins and just being like, I'm gonna ask a woman to marry me, and I don't expect her to say no because she's a woman. And that's pretty messed up, I would say. Now, to talk about the second half of the book, Darcy does redeem himself, I will say. He makes amends for the way he acts. He shows Elizabeth more respect. But honestly, I don't know. It still feels kind of fake. The thing is, this is kind of going to bring in the modern perspective a bit. They still get married, like, really quickly. Like, right at the end of the book, they get married. Which makes me think that Darcy didn't really understand why it was wrong that he proposed to Elizabeth out of the blue. Even though they both like each other now. But I feel like that's more of a modern perspective coming through, because really, we're going to look at all this huge list. Everybody gets proposed really quickly. So what are you going to do? One other thing is, when we're thinking about family, he has a sister. She seems nice. We don't really learn a lot about her. But he does have a close relationship with Catherine de Bourg, I believe. Boog or Borg. Who's just, she's something else. She is a pain. So having to spend extended time with her is not something I think most people would want to do. Yeah, so overall, you know what? He's got good, he's got bad. I'm going to put him in B. We're going to start with B tier. He's average. He's in the middle. He's got a lot of good qualities, but way down by some other ones. Okay. So let's see So next up, we're going to talk about Willoughby, the primary love interest of Marianne in Sense and Sensibility. Now, if any of you have read Sense and Sensibility, you might know where this is going, but he's definitely going to end up being the F'est of F tier, in my opinion. I think some people find him redeemable by the end because he acts sorry for what he's done, but I don't buy it. I don't buy it even for a second. So let's talk a little bit about what he's done. So he has a relationship with Marianne, as far as they're talking, they're flirting, in the first half of the book. And you know what? They're cute together. They're both kind of immature, I would say, but Marianne's like 15, so what would you expect? Yeah, so, and also I want to mention, there will be specific cases where I talk about the age gap, and if I think it's messed up, but this one, I don't really think that much of it. It's not that abnormal for the time, I would say. That's another thing where I'm combining modern and old perspectives, and kind of coming to a conclusion based on the two. But yeah, anyway, back to Willoughby. As far as his money at the beginning, he isn't rich, but as we'll see later, he has goals of becoming rich, and he's willing to do some crappy stuff to get there. He's made the estate holder of his aunt's estate, which kind of ups his personal ranking, because he ends up getting a lot of money, or at the very least he's going to inherit a lot of money. And then, you get to the meat of why he's so bad, the way he treats Marianne after going back to London. He ignores every one of her letters, and the way he acts when he sees her in London, it's just like, it's so douchey. I mean, it's really not fair to Marianne. She's getting her heart broken by this guy who pretended to really like her. Well, you know what? I don't know if he pretended. Willoughby's just one of those characters, or one of those people, really, who is very self-centered and obsessed with themselves in a way. So he just doesn't even seem to notice or care that Marianne is upset until he realizes that he misses her. So he's very selfish. Yeah, so the letter he sends her and kind of the cold shoulder he gives her, it's just really shitty. He's a shitty person for that. I mean, and also I wrote here, he's a gold digger. All he cares about is the money in his relationship with Eliza and with Lady Jane Grey too, I believe. He's all about the money. And then we find out some even worse stuff, that Darcy got Miss Eliza Williams pregnant when she was 15, and he abandoned the baby and abandoned her. Yeah, like, that's taking it to another level. To act shitty to your significant other, sure, but to abandon your baby and leave a 15-year-old to take care of him or her by themselves, that's a new level. And you know what? That money that he was gonna inherit, he gets that shit run right out. So there goes any positive, superficial value he had. Yeah, so that's about it. I would say anything positive about Willoughby is cancelled out and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And because of that, I'm giving him an F tier. He is the bottom of the bottom, in my opinion. Just a complete douche. I would not recommend marrying this guy. Alright, so next up we're going to go to another character from Sense and Sensibility, Colonel Brandon. But I guess you could call him one of the primary love interests, the secondary love interest of Marianne. Now, Colonel Brandon, he's someone you're supposed to like a lot. He's the he's the nice guy in a lot of ways, and he is genuinely nice in a lot of ways. From a modern perspective, we see a lot of what he does is really creepy. I see a lot of it as really creepy. Yeah, let's talk about the basics though. He's a military man, which shows that he's willing to put in work and discipline himself, which that is an admirable trait. And yeah, he also has a lot of money, a huge estate, thanks to his brother dying. Sorry, brother. But you know what? It's ruthless out here. Yeah, so he is in a good economic position when he meets the Dashwoods. Now, this is where we're going to touch back on the age gap. Brandon is 34. He's 34, getting involved with 17-year-olds and 15-year-olds. I don't care what time it is. That's messed up. That's weird. That's not okay. That's not okay. So, any sense of authenticity I feel about Colonel Brandon's character is completely thrown out the window because he's a 34-year-old man trying to get with 17-year-old and 15-year-olds. A lot of times that he's a predator. I no way around that. I understand it was a different time, but come on. So yeah, and his first relationship is with Eliza, his cousin Eliza, who was 17. Yeah. he's an awkward guy. That's what we talked about before. He's kind of like the shy guy, so you kind of are supposed to root for him. And you know what? You do root for him partially. He's a nice guy. He does do things that are the opposite of what Willoughby would do. He's shown to be selfless. Yeah. But yeah, I would say he's above Mr. Darcy. He is a nice guy. And you know what? My problems with him are kind of solely the age thing. So you know what? It's hard to quantify that, like how I would... its relevance to this tier list, I guess. But I'm going to go with A tier, actually. I think he is a pretty... And you know, when we see his relationship with Marianne, they're going to have a happy marriage, it seems. Despite all the trouble they went through, I think they have a good chance of doing well. So yeah, I'm gonna give him an A tier despite the creepy part of it. That feels kind of wrong, honestly, to put that. But you know what? There's a low standard, I gotta say. Not these characters aren't the best. So we're gonna talk about... Shoot, what's his name? Yes, we're gonna talk about George Knightley next. Who... Did I mess this up here? I have 2 George Knightleys and also a picture of George Knightley. Okay, well, we'll just move ahead. Now, George Knightley, he is the primary love interest of Emma. Just a little clarification. I would say Emma's probably my favorite of the 3. I enjoyed Emma the most. Its characters were the most interesting. And it took some risks, I would say, in the context of Jane Austen's work. Now, something I want to mention about George and Emma's relationship is that they have something that none of these other characters really have, which is like a history together. If that makes sense. They've been friends for a really long time, and they know each other really well. They've been there for each other through a lot. And you know what? That he shows respect to women in a way that's not traditional, but he gets mad at Emma because he knows she can do better, and that she deserves better. And I think his willingness to do that shows that he has more respect for women than most of the other characters. I mean, and you know, his siblings, and he's definitely a more mature guy than most of these characters, and that's really a breath of fresh air, I would say, to see that he's a responsible guy. And you know what? He truly does care about Emma. So we see Colonel Brandon. He does care about Marianne, but you know what? He doesn't really know Marianne. So his care is kind of hard to gauge. You know, like how much of it is genuine. I'm not sure, but I think we know pretty firmly that George's passion and love for Emma is real, which is great. They definitely have one of the best relationships in the Austen canon. Yeah, and the you know what, they riff off each other very well. They have great personal moments throughout Emma. Yeah, and I also said here, this relationship is the clearest example of companionate love in Austen's canon. And I have a little quote here from George to Emma at the end of the book. He says, marry me, my wonderful, darling friend," which is such a sweet moment. I really like that moment. Maybe I have a soft spot for companionate marriage from my modern perspective. Like, it's really sweet that they were best friends first, and then they ended up being in a relationship. And you know, we're just gonna forget that they're cousins. Let's just pretend it doesn't matter that they're cousins. It's fine. I'm giving George a S tier. He's pretty great. All right, so now
we've covered probably the biggest characters. We're going to move on to some smaller characters at this point. Now, next up, we got Frank Churchill, who is one of the primary love interests in Emma. He is betrothed to Jane. Jane? Is that it? Yeah, Jane from Emma. There's a lot of Janes. She throws her own name in there quite a bunch. So Frank he's a sarcastic guy. I wrote here he's a hedonist and snob, which I think is true. It's a little harsh, but he is honestly like that. And yeah, he loves to drink, eat, and dance. He's shown to be doing that throughout the book. So he's a little bit carefree. He's young. He acts young. And yeah, I would say one of the main arguments against him is he is kind of a player, I would say. I sound so old saying that, but I would say he's a player. You see how he acts with Emma, even though the entire book he's betrothed to Jane Fairfax. So I don't honestly... that's pretty shitty, I would say. Because he's kind of like taking advantage of Emma's situation and flirting with her. And Jane doesn't know anything about this. Jane is such a sweet lady. I mean, I don't know. It seems weird that they're a couple, honestly. But the book tries to make it pretty clear that they are in a loving relationship. And you know what? I gotta give Frank some points for that. Honestly, we don't really see much of that loving relationship. But there is a loving relationship. I will trust what the book is telling us, that there's really good stuff here. And you know what? You gotta give him some credit. He has a pretty tragic family life. Yeah, so he had a rough start. And we're talking about money-wise. He's dependent on his aunt, who has a lot of money. Since there's no inheritance from his dead parents, honestly. So it's kind of all dependent on that. And I got a quote here from Mrs. Weston about Frank. She says, "You must not be expecting such a very fine young man. You have only had my account, you know. I dare say he is really nothing extraordinary." Which is an interesting line from Mrs. Weston. She's kind of like giving him a backhanded compliment. But I think it describes Frank pretty well. He's got good qualities, and on the surface he's pretty great. But he's got some issues, I would say. And just personally, I feel like this one's pretty personal. I just don't really like him very much. But saying all that, I probably would still give him a B tier, because I don't think there's really that much negative about him. It's all kind of dependent on my personal opinion about him. There's not as much evidence for him being a poor husband. So yeah, I think he would go in B tier. Now I'm going to talk about another minor character from Emma, Robert Martin, who he works for George, and he's kind of portrayed as a very honest, hardworking man. Now, part of his issue is that he is of low class, which, if you care about money and you care about maintaining like your high position, that kind of is important, especially in the 1800s. Now, if we're thinking about modern times, it doesn't really matter much. Being a quality worker is more important than having good societal standings. In modern times, I would say. But you know what? He doesn't have much money, but he shows a lot of heart and love throughout his scenes. Emma describes him as not the most handsome, so there's that. And you know what? I believe there's not as much evidence to say, but I believe he has true feelings for Harriet when he proposes to her, despite the fact that they don't really know each other very well. I think he's a genuine guy, and you know what? I believe that in part because of the way George treats him. Like, he definitely has a lot of respect for him and sees him as a really great guy. So I think that provides weight to him being a really nice guy. Yeah, and I mean, we see him with his new wife. They seem to be very happy. And the thing is, I would say we don't really know much about Robert to go up and beyond Like, I'm not going to give him an S tier because I just don't think we know enough about him as a character to say whether or not he's a good... He's a perfect husband. But based on what we've seen, I would still give him an A. Despite the fact that he's not handsome and not rich, I'd still give him an A. Yeah. So next up, we're going to talk about another minor character in Emma, Mr. Elton. So, Mr. Elton is mainly involved in the story through Emma trying to set him up with Harriet. And that comes into like the main conflict of the first half. Very much, it feels very influential of like a sitcom story or something like that. Is that Emma's trying to set up Harriet with Mr. Elton, but Mr. Elton likes Emma instead. Which is a bit of a shame. Now, Mr. Elton, he's kind of like the opposite of Robert Martin in a lot of ways, because he's considered handsome and he has a sizable inheritance, but he's very shallow, it seems. He doesn't want to get with Harriet, mostly it seems like because of her lower societal stance, and he doesn't really show much respect for women either in the way he treats his proposal to Emma. He seems, again, kind of like a player. He doesn't really regard women's opinions highly. And you know what? It says something that he gets married really quickly after saying he loves Emma. You know, and I think it definitely says something that his wife is just terrible. It says something about his character that his wife is just terrible, and he's okay with that. They're not a fun couple, I gotta say. But again, just like with Robert Martin, to call him F tier, I think it's a bit much because we don't know that much about him. He doesn't do enough stuff that's horrible to be put in F tier, I think. So I'm going to put in D tier. Now, we're going to talk about some characters you might not have considered for marriageability. Since we've kind of gone through most of the bachelors, we're going to be talking about like the dads and stuff too, which is, I think, is funny. So, next up, we're going to talk about Mr. Woodhouse, who is Emma's dad. Now, Mr. Woodhouse is kind of like a comic relief character in a lot of ways, but also kind of tragic. Yeah, I wrote here that he's a bit of an airhead, and he's an old man in a lot of ways, which can, I don't know, I would consider being very old and acting old to be a negative trait, I would say, in my opinion. But you know what, he shows a lot of love for Emma, and there is, I do feel bad for him. He seems really distraught by the loss of his wife, even though it was a while ago at this point. And that's really hard. So I really appreciate his willingness to express those emotions. That definitely gives him some points. But I mean, he's old, he's paranoid. This stuff doesn't really lend well to marriageability, I gotta say. I appreciate that he really loves his daughter Emma, but who really cares? I mean, we're talking about marriageability. Where's yeah, he's an old man. He's not handsome. I mean, and you know what? He has a lot of money, but if you marry him, you're not getting any of that money because he's gonna die. So you're not really gonna get the benefit of that marriage. Yeah. So he's kind of middle of the road. I'm gonna put him in C tier. Now, where is he? Now we finally have a representative of each tier. But yeah, I'm gonna put Mr. Woodhouse in C tier. Now, next we have Mr. Palmer from Sense and Sensibility. He's a very minor character. There's not that much to say about him. He's considered rough and grumpy, but he warms up to the Dashwoods eventually and shares some jokes with them and converses with them. And I also wrote here. I haven't seen the movies. I've only seen clips. But I said here, Hugh Laurie is really great as him. I really enjoy what I've seen of him as that role. Yeah, and he treats his wife well, which is nice, and he has a decent amount of money. So even though he's on the older side, I would give him quite a lot of points for that. So where is he? I'm going to put him in B tier. You know, he is still kind of old and crotchety, but give him some credit. He might warm up on you. So next up we have Sir John Middleton. Where is he? Here we go. Sir John Middleton. So he's a very generous man. He's the one who offers the Dashwoods their cottage that they live in after being kicked out of their home in Sense and Sensibility. Which, you know what, that's very generous of him. It definitely shows good character on his part that he was willing to do that. And you know, anyone willing to stand against Fanny is okay in my book. But yeah, he's very friendly, generous, and excited to meet the Dashwoods and excited to be friends with them. And you know what? I gotta give him credit for this. He and his wife seem to have a good relationship. And he also seems to have a good relationship with his mother-in-law, which is commendable. That definitely gives him some points. He's willing to... There's a stereotype that getting along with your in-laws is like impossible and that there'll always be fights. Well, you know what? Not for John Middleton. He ends up making it work pretty well. So you know what? I think that's a lot of good. So I'm going to actually put him in A tier. Got to give Sir John Middleton some props. He's underrated. Now, next up, we're going to talk about Mr. Dashwood, the father of the Dashwoods. Oh, wait, no. Mr. Dashwood is the brother of the three sisters. They're half-brother. Now, Mr. Dashwood has the quite negative trait of being married to Fanny, and Fanny is just the worst. If I was including women, she would also be F tier. But yeah, that kind of doesn't reflect on his character that he's married to Fanny. And you know what? He's spineless. He doesn't stand up for his sisters. Their dad, specifically, that was his last wish. He said, "Please take care of your sisters," and he's manipulated by his wife into not really caring about them at all and kind of just like leaving them out to dry. Which is that's not cool. That's pretty shitty. Now, I will say I don't think he's a bad man. He's a cowardly man. I do think he genuinely cares about his sisters, but yeah, there's not much you could really do when you're married to Fanny. I guess your opinion doesn't really hold much weight. But you know what? That's not a good quality for a marriage, I would say. You gotta be able to stand up for yourself. Of course, it's hard, I know. Not gonna hang him out to dry as far as his faults, because everyone has faults, but because of that, I don't rank him very highly, but he's not the bottom of bottom tier. I'd put him in D tier. Now, next up we have Robert Ferrers, the other primary love, or Eleanor's primary love interest in Sense and Sensibility. I don't know why he took this long to get to. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's Edward. Robert is Edward's brother, and the brother of Fanny, too. So we don't learn much about Robert, but he's like Fanny in a lot of ways. He follows his sister's suit. He is disrespectful to the Dashwoods and looks down on them. But, you know, at the end of the book, because Edward loses his inheritance, he will have a lot of money as the only male heir left. So that's something you want to consider. But yeah, based on all that, nothing really good about him. His willingness to kind of enable his sister is pretty negative, I would say. Well, I don't think we know enough about him for an F tier. I'm going to put him in D tier. Yeah, so next up we're going to talk about Edward, Robert's brother and the primary love interest of Eleanor in Sense and Sensibility. So he distinguishes himself from his brother and sister because he's very different he's quiet, more thoughtful, and you know what? It seems like at the beginning he pairs well with Eleanor because of that. Eleanor is the more sensible and laid back and unemotional of the three sisters. Margaret doesn't really show any characteristics, but out of her and Marianne. So yeah, they work well together. Now, this is another case where he's kind of spineless, you know, and that kind of goes against him. So what I wrote here, he's not handsome. He's considered not very handsome. His manners are not very good. He was too distant to do justice to himself, I wrote. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but his understanding was good, is it? Yeah, and you know what? He doesn't really fit the position as the patriarch of the Ferrer family, and he kind of loses that position, which kind of takes some points away from him because he loses inheritance. It's pretty bad. He has nothing. He's having to go on the kindness of what's his name, Colonel Brandon, to actually have a house, have somewhere to live, which, you know, for the time, it's pretty embarrassing. And you know what, the way he handles the whole situation with Lucy Steele and Eleanor is pretty childish, I would say. You shouldn't be falling in love, or honestly, you shouldn't even really be. You shouldn't be engaging in relationship stuff the way he was with Eleanor when he promised to be betrothed. That's pretty messed up, I would say. Now, you know, I feel bad for him too, because he is kind of trying to find his way, and I do think he genuinely cares about Eleanor, and I don't think he wants to hurt Lucy Steele either. This is just kind of a situation that he found himself in that really sucks, and he doesn't know how to handle it. But yeah, despite the sympathy I feel for him, I cannot say this that much good. I'm gonna put him in. No, this is not. Where is George? Edward Ferrers. I'm gonna put him in C tier. Okay, so next up we have Charles Bingley. Now, I really like Charles. I liked him from the beginning. And I remember thinking as I was reading Pride and Prejudice, I'm like, why isn't Charles Bingley the character everybody loves? Why is it Mr. Darcy? And, you know, everyone loves the dark and brooding character and wanting to change him. So, yeah, I guess I understand that. But I like Bingley a lot. He's a cool guy. Despite him and Darcy being pretty different, I think they get along well as friends. It's a cool dynamic. But similar to Darcy, I do also think he's kind of a player. He gets around. He kind of knows that he's charming and well-liked. And he doesn't necessarily respect a relationship that well. He's still very immature, in my opinion. So Elizabeth, this is the first thing Elizabeth says about Mr. Bingley. She says, Mr. Bingley was good-looking and gentlemanlike. He had a pleasant countenance and easy, unaffected manner. I think that describes him pretty well. And we don't really learn that much about his relationship with Jane Bennet, but I believe it's a genuine and caring relationship based on what we know about Mr. Bingley. I would guess that. But you know what? Like I was saying, he does like juggle two relationships when it comes to his relationship with Darcy's sister and with Jane. He's kind of shown to not be as honest as he could be, or he should be. But you know what? He's still young. Like, I honestly think he's good at heart. You know, he's got some faults, but I overall would put him in A tier. Where is he? Bingley. Put him in A tier. Now we have probably the least liked character in all of Austen's canon, George Wickham. So yeah, he's gonna go in F tier. You kind of guessed it. He he has no money. He's a liar, and he manipulates everyone around him to get what he wants. I mean, if that doesn't clear up why he's disliked, I mean, nothing will. But you know what? We see in the beginning he is charming, which, I mean, that could be a compliment, but I think it shows how devious he is more than anything. And yeah, he is at first Elizabeth likes him. She thinks he's cool. And he seems like he understands that Darcy's kind of a jerk and like has better intentions, but he really doesn't. It really does not help that he is in massive debt. Not really, maybe if he had good character, you could look past the massive debt, but you cannot. I really don't think so. I think this is as clear as day a F tier. So I wrote something here about him. This is a quote from Austen. There certainly was something great. There was some great mismanagement in the education of those two young men. One has got all the goodness, and the other all the appearance of it. That's pretty clear too. He has the presence. He looks like he's good, but he's terrible underneath the surface. So George Wickham, F tier. He's definitely an F tier. So next up, we're going to talk about another minor character from Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Collins. Now, Mr. Collins, he's a clergyman, which, that on the surface seems like something really good, but honestly, the way he acts, not what you would think of a clergyman. He doesn't really follow the idea of chastity at all. And the clearest example of this is when he asks Elizabeth to marry him, because it's not respectful. He doesn't even recognize that she says no, honestly, the idea of a woman saying no to him is not even, he can't even fathom it, which, pretty clearly he does not respect women if he doesn't even think they're allowed to say no to him, which is pretty crazy. And he could be described as a social climber, which, is just generally not seen as a positive trait. And he ends up marrying one of Elizabeth's sisters, which, I don't know. So sometimes the secondary sisters in these books just get thrown under the bus. Like, I don't know, Mary Wickham, Mary, Mr. Collins. Just, I don't know why they can't just go marry someone other than the main family, but whatever. So yeah, and I have a quote here from Elizabeth's rejection of him and how he acted. He says, "When I do myself the honor of speaking to you next on this subject, I shall hope to receive a more favorable answer than you have now given me, though I am far from accusing you of cruelty at present, because I know it be the established custom of your sex to reject a man on the first application, and perhaps you have even said as much to encourage my suit as would be consistent with the true delicacy of female character." And then I wrote, "What a jackass." I think that says it pretty clear. He's basically just like, "Oh, I see, you're a woman and you have to say no the first time because it's like you're a woman or whatever. So I'll ask you again later." And it's like, no, man, that's not what that means at all. So you know what? He's F tier too. No redeeming qualities and plenty of bad. So I'm gonna put him in F tier too. So next up we got Mr. Bennet, who is Elizabeth's dad. And you know what? He seems like a nice guy. He loves his family and he loves Elizabeth the most, honestly. It seems to happen in a lot of Jane Austen's work, is a close relationship between the father and the main character, which is cool. I think she had that in real life, and that kind of is what inspired that. But you know what? He's a dad of a big family, and they're not as well off as some of the other characters. They're just making do. But you know what? It is kind of a negative quality, I would say, that he shows such clear favoritism for Elizabeth. I would say that's not necessarily the best characteristic a dad should have. But I will also say there's some negative qualities in that he doesn't really respect his daughter's opinions when it comes to marriage. He kind of just tells them to marry whoever they're asked. Because that's standard for the time, which is pretty shitty, I would say. They deserve the right to make their own decisions and to say no. And you know what, as far as the money, he doesn't got the money anymore. The money's going to Mr. Collins, who married Lydia. So that's not good. That's not a good quality, I would say. And he's old. That takes off some points. So Mr. Bennet, I'm going to put him in C tier. Not bad, not great. So actually, we were at the last character. I know we got a lot of others here, but I think these are all duplicates besides John Knightley. And honestly, I don't know if I even have John Knightley. we'll use this picture of George for John. I don't know what I messed up here, but so John is George's younger brother. He doesn't really. There's not much of him in the book. He doesn't participate much, but he is shown to have a loving relationship with Emma's sister, and they kind of look after Emma. They're like her mentors in a way. Her relationship goals, which that's sweet. I think they have a really nice relationship. I mean, they have a kid. They're probably one of the best young couples and couples in general in the in Austen's canon. But there is something to say that the fact that he's the younger brother, so he's not really making any money from inheritance, which is unfortunate. But you know, he works as a lawyer. He shows some dedication and has a good job. So he's still making money and is disciplined enough to have a job, which a lot of these characters don't. So yeah, I gotta give him a lot of credit for that. He seems like a really cool dude. I'm gonna give him an A tier. And yeah, that's about it. This is our list. We only got one S tier. George Knightley, in my opinion, is by far the most worthy marriage candidate. Definitely, if George is going to propose to you, anyone out there, I think you should consider it. You should definitely say yes. Now in A tier, we have a decent amount. We have 5 characters, and all these guys, you know, they have some negative traits, but the positive, for the most part, outweighs the negative. Honestly, I'm not so sure about Colonel Brandon, because really, the age gap is, I don't know, but I'll keep it the way it is. Now, in B tier, we have some controversial characters with a lot of good, but a lot of bad as well. And then we also have Sir John Middleton, who there's not that much to say about. And then C, D, and F tier, we have slowly worse characters. C, you know, they're just kind of eh. There's nothing really that crazy to say about them. D tier, same. More negative than good, definitely. And then we have the worst characters in F tier. Yeah, so I think this is a pretty good list. Before I end the video, I'm going to actually read a quote from a reviewer of Austen's work. This is from Manna Van Prague from the Dress Shop of Dreams. She says, "Listen to that voice that tells you not to trust someone, even though he's deliciously charming. Remember Wickham and Willoughby and all those cads. And give another man a chance, even though they're not your type. Remember Mr. Knightley and Colonel Brandon and all those quiet heroes." I think this is a funny quote. Kind of summarizes this whole thing. It basically summarized as, give the nice guy a chance, which is funny to me. It's got different connotations in modern times, but I can definitely see that. Look beyond the surface for a lot of these characters. Mr. Darcy may seem, you know, top tier, because he's got a lot of money, very handsome, and very charming, but you know what, there's some good guys out there who show different qualities. Yeah, so I really enjoyed doing this video. Hope you guys like my tier list and feel good about it. So yeah, I'm going to close the video there. Thanks for watching.